Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Soccerpedia Podcast with your host Kai Uchimura. For today's episode, we will have a returning guest in Jason Longshore, who is the Atlanta United color commentator. Without further ado, here's the show. I wanted to talk about mainly the MLS, kind of the recapping the season, what's been going on off season, and then of course a little bit of the Atlanta United news. And those that don't know, Jason Longshore is a color commentator for Atlanta United, so you can hear him all the time on the radio, and then whenever games are happening, you can sometimes hear him on TV too. So, all right, so let's kind of recap the season or this past MLS season. Columbus Crew winning the title over LAFC in the final. What do you think? Was this a Columbus Crew has had a pretty good season, regular season, finishing the top three. Do you think that this was pretty much like a surprise? Was it expected? What are your thoughts on their season?
A little bit of a surprise, but not massive. I think when you look at MLS, there's not always going to be just one team that is your favorite. And I think Columbus was a team that by the time you got to the middle point of the season, they were among the favorites. There were some questions going into the year. New manager and Wilfried Nancy, he'd had good success in Montreal, but Columbus wasn't a great team in 22, and they didn't dramatically change who they were. I think it's a credit to Wilfried Nancy and the moves they made in the summer. And I know a lot of people talked about Julian Gressel coming over in the summer as what would put them over the top. It wasn't that. It was Rudy Camacho, in my opinion, coming in, the center back from Montreal who knew the system that Nancy wanted to play, and it allowed him to really play three center backs, but only one of them was a true center back. The other two were converted fullbacks, and Steven Moreira, Malte Amundsen, sometimes Sean Zawadzki, who was a converted midfielder. And it just fed into the total football, total possession approach that Wilfried Nancy had. And from the second half of the year on, once they got settled with Camacho in the back, they became the best team in the league. They were the team that, I didn't want to see for Atlanta United in the postseason. They were the team that knocked Atlanta out. Atlanta got a win at home against Columbus. They were the last team to beat the Crew. They'll be the first team to play the Crew in 2024, which is cool. But this is a really good team, and they have one of the best managers in the league in Wilfried Nancy, and they should be the favorite going into 24 because they're pretty much bringing everybody back.
All right. Speaking of 24, we're currently in the MLS off season, and of course, for whenever the off season is happening, every single team, of course, is looking to improve. But if you had to choose three teams that for this MLS off season is like a make or break, like, hey, this is like crucial. I mean, of course, off seasons are crucial for everybody, but if you had to choose three teams that are like, hey, we've got to nail this one right. What do you think those teams are?
I think they're in really different situations. I mean, my gut reaction to that is number one, Miami, just because of you have a limited window with Lionel Messi, and at his age, he's not going to play forever. So you got to win, and you got to win the league. And if you don't, it's going to be seen as a failure, no matter how many shirts you sell. And you've already won a trophy in Leagues Cup, and that's a big deal. And you're going to be in CONCACAF Champions Cup, and that's a big deal. But winning the league is what success is really measured by. And in MLS, it's even harder because you have to win the playoffs. So you have to put yourself in a good position in the seeding. And anybody who tells you that the regular season doesn't matter, go look at Atlanta United last season. If they have the home field advantage against Columbus, they might knock the team out that went on to win the thing.
Mhm.
Home field advantage in the playoffs is very important. So your regular season is very important. Miami has to get their off season right. And they're talking about bringing in Luis Suarez. He had a great season with Gremio in Brazil, one of the leading scorers in South America. He can still do it. You've got other things in that team that have to improve. It can't just be the veteran superstars. So they've got to get some of these other signings right. I think the LA Galaxy is kind of in a similar situation in that, now after a few seasons of less than success, you've really been passed by the other team in the market in LAFC. You brought in Chicharito, which was a big announcement when it came, and you talk about moving shirts and you moving
Mhm.
tickets, and Chicharito was that kind of a figure who did that for the Galaxy, had horrible luck with the knee injury last year,
Mhm.
and you've moved on and you've got two designated player spots open. And you have an incredibly exciting, young, talented player in Ricky Pooch. You've got to maximize the time that you have with him. So you've got to get big signings right if you're the Galaxy. And I think the other one is Toronto in the sense that they're in a really weird situation
Mhm.
because you've got a new manager coming in John Herdman. Pressure will be on him straight away. I think the Canadian media will turn on him very quickly if he doesn't find success
Mhm.
soon, because there were a good bit of friction towards the end of his run with the Canadian national team.
Mhm.
So he comes in the door. You've got two Italian superstars in that team, and Lorenzo Insigne and Federico Bernardeschi, who in various ways have failed since
Mhm.
coming to Toronto and have not been happy about their time in Toronto. And there's questions about if they're going to be there by the time we get to opening day. And then what do you do around that to make it work?
Mhm.
So they've got a balancing act of two huge names that might not be the best fits or might not be happy, and you got to move them and then you got to replace them. So really weird situations. And those are three huge markets. I mean, I think the other one's Chicago in the sense that that's another big market that has failed. Lately, they've stuck with Frank Klopas. These are big markets in this league that if those teams are good and are capturing their city's attention, you'll draw huge crowds and get huge interest. Those are markets that the league wants to see succeed. The teams have to get it done at that level.
Hmm. Speaking of the league, the past couple of seasons and in moving forward, there's going to be, or there have been, and looks to be big structural changes. This past MLS playoff season was a kind of revamp in their structure and their playoff format. What was some fans weren't a big fan of the way that the playoff format was done with like this best of three in the first round and then moving on to a home and home. What's your take on the way MLS structured this year's playoff format?
My take is that the American soccer conversation really needs to take a deep breath a lot of times, because anytime something is different than either what it's been like or if it's different than what England does, everybody freaks out and starts yelling and starts stomping their feet and then goes out to make a statement about how angry they are and then goes out to trash the league and then gets a soapbox to go and make another statement to try to get more attention. It's a real waste of time. There are plenty of leagues worldwide that have different formats than England or other European leagues. And one of them is a country that just won the World Cup in Argentina. I think they've been able to figure it out, even though the Argentine league format changes a lot bigger than MLS does every year. All kinds of crazy change. They'll drop relegation in the middle of the season in Argentina. They'll relegate over a 3-year period instead of a 1-year period. They have kind of two separate competitions instead of an apertura clausura. It's a small league and then a shorter league structure and then a expanded leagues cup kind of structure that has a playoff at the end of it. So it kind of works for them. I feel like they've figured it out, and that's a pretty good soccer culture. And no, not all those players come in that national team come from Argentina right now, but they all started there. Just like for the U.S. national team, you're going to have players who start in MLS. Most of them will, not all of them, but most of them will. We've got to stop with the freaking out and yelling about things that are different or yelling about things that are not traditional. Soccer in this country is not traditional. MLS is not traditional compared to the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball. Change is not always bad. We've got to stop freaking out, because if you take the reaction to that announcement away and you just go and watch those games, the first round of the playoffs this year was better than it's been in a number of years, because by nature of the structure, you did not have teams do what we always see, and you're going to see it in Champions League coming up. And all the talk of Champions League and it's the gold standard. Two legs. I love two-leg setups. The first game in a two-leg setup, so often, it. Everybody who's listening to this knows it. If you are the road team in that first game and you give up a goal in the first half, what are you going to do? You're going to park the bus, you're going to sit back, you're going to defend, and you're going to try to get out of there 1-0. And then they're going to ask you after the game, if you're the manager, well, how do you feel about it? I feel really good about what we did. We lost 1-0. I feel really good about it. We have a good shot in the second leg. Blah, 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 blah. All the cliches. In this setup, nobody did that because it was all about the result. So you give up a couple goals in the first half in game one in this, you keep going for it. You lose 4-0, it doesn't matter. You have game two. It doesn't matter. You keep fighting. It's all about the result.
Mm-hmm.
So it created a situation, in my opinion, where the games were more entertaining because nobody gave up on that contest. Nobody said we're just going to sit back and defend. We're going to be conservative. Now, in the single game knockouts afterwards, of course you did, and they kind of look. MLS liked the single game knockouts. I didn't. I like the 2-leg setup. But if I have to choose between the single game all the way through the board or doing the best of 3 in the first round, so everybody gets a home game, and the setup that they did with the result being all that matters, I'm going to take that best of 3 every day. And
Mm-hmm.
the more I see it, the more you can convince me that it is a more interesting format because you don't get teams that give up on it. Atlanta United, for example, they go to Columbus in game one. They were missing Thiago Almada, who picked up a red card on decision day. They decided to be a little defensive to start. They tried something different. Didn't work. They knew they had game two. And if they won game two at home, which you have to expect to win,
Mm-hmm.
then you were going to get another shot to do something different in Columbus in game three. And that game's another prime example. That was a back and forth game. You give up 2 goals early, you fall behind, you keep fighting, you get one back, you give up again, you get another one back. It's 3-2. Like you're fighting for the game the whole way through, as opposed to what we see sometimes in aggregate setups. So I loved it. I think it played out well. I think you need to see teams with home games in the playoffs. You want to make the regular season count, and that's why MLS liked the single game knockout, because if you're the better team in the regular season, you get the game in your building. I get that. I understand that. I think the game best of 3 setup works well. I don't think you can do it the whole way through the playoffs because of just the unknown factors of scheduling. Because then you have to set aside the game threes.
Mm-hmm.
You can't always do that. In this schedule, the way it was structured, because of the international breaks, you could do the best of 3s before the international break. And if teams 1 and 2, then great. They have a weekend off. Then they go into the international break. And then you come back with the single games. I think it worked. And I think the drama and competition and quality of play all said that as well.
Another big or proposed change that's kind of currently what's been going on. You've definitely heard about how the MLS teams have, or there's a word that they would not field their MLS first team rosters in U.S. Open Cup. And those that don't know, U.S. Open Cup is like the oldest tournament, soccer tournament in the U.S. Kind of models after the FA Cup in England, and a lot of other soccer nations have this type of tournament where the top teams in the country could easily play like a 6th or 7th division team that is, in the middle of nowhere. And it's many soccer fans, regardless of country, they enjoy seeing like the likes of Cristiano Ronaldo taking on some random person in the 5th, tier or whoever. And there was, the MLS teams or the league was saying that, hey, MLS teams will just send their MLS Next rosters to play in the Open Cup, and that's caused a huge, at least online and fan backlash. And I kind of, me personally, I side with that. Hey, MLS team should be able to play their first team rosters, and if they want to play their youngsters, they should, but it shouldn't be a MLS Next roster only, but what's your take on that, Jason?
Yeah, I'm with you. Again, it's another opportunity for lots of yelling and screaming online because that's what American soccer does best, unfortunately. But in this case, yeah, I'm with you. I think teams should have increased flexibility on using their reserve players in this tournament. It's something that needs to happen in general for MLS. And I know, when you want to get into the realities of the situation, which a lot of times we like to skip because we can just yell and scream instead. It's complicated because of the MLS Players Association and the collective bargaining agreement that was ratified between both. because that defines how MLS teams can use their second team structures. So you have a limited number of call ups that you can use for these players throughout the season. It's not by competition, it's by just the overall calendar year. You only get to call them up for 4 times. And it's something that needs to change. It needs to get to a point, and again, this is unique in MLS because you don't have the player union power in other leagues that can protect their players in this way. In the Premier League, you can call up whoever you want from your club to be on your team as long as they're registered in time and you put them on your roster. They can play in these games. They can play in league games. MLS can't do that. You don't have a Premier League players union with the kind of power that the MLSPA has. Again, that's something that's unique to the United States. And you have to understand that, because in a perfect world, what would have been done here, in a perfect world, you'd have the increased reserve player
Mhm.
usage anyway. But in a perfect world, what would have been done is not an announcement about putting the second teams into the tournament. It would have been that the league is expanding the use of MLS Next Pro players for Lamar Hunt US Open Cup games. So if teams choose to not go for the Open Cup, which happens in every cup
Yeah.
competition worldwide, where sometimes teams might have a rash of injuries, might already be in a couple of other competitions, might use it as an opportunity to give young players an opportunity to be seen. It happens everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Um, MLS teams should have that opportunity. But when you're governed by that CBA, where you can't just call up every contracted player that you have from your second team to play in these games, this was the move that happened. And I wish it hadn't. I wish it could have been resolved beforehand. I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than anybody yelling and screaming in front of a screen like us about it is going to really grasp. And it's something that the league and the federation need to sit down
Mm-hmm.
and nail down. The federation is kind of the secondary factor to this, because their structure for the tournament, as long as your roster is league compliant, you're good, because MLS has different league roster rules than
Mm-hmm.
USL, which has different ones than your local amateur leagues that some of these teams come from. So they're all different. So US soccer is basically league signs off on your roster, you're good to go. The problem is the MLS side, because of that reserve player call up situation.
Mm-hmm.
That has to get expanded. And if the league has to get the MLSPA to agree to it, they should, because many times over the years, you have heard members of the MLS Players Association talk about not enjoying playing in the Open Cup. They've said the same about playing in CONCACAF Champions League or CONCACAF Champions Cup again. These are things that, this is a different soccer culture than other parts of the world. And I'm with you. This is a tournament that I've been involved in trying to get teams qualified for before I've been involved with Atlanta United.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tournament that I love very, very much. But it's also, yes, it has the age, but professional teams have played in this tournament in modern times since 1995.
Mm-hmm.
The North American Soccer League teams did not participate in this tournament. The teams after the NASL, before MLS started, did not participate in this tournament until 95, which is where they brought in the USL teams that were around at that time, the A League, and knowing MLS was coming in 96. It's a tournament with a lot of value. It's also a tournament that US soccer needs to do better at taking care of.
Mm-hmm.
And while this issue in MLS is not US soccer's making, and they really can't solve it easily, this is a tournament that needs a title sponsor. This is a tournament that needs, if you're going to have a TV partner for the federation, all of these games, especially in today's time, they need to be streamed. You can't pick and choose and say, well, we're not going to stream that. Teams going to have to figure it out at the last minute. This needs to be something that is done. One camera is fine. Just get it done. It need to be streamed. That didn't happen last year with the new TV partner, but there has to be a title sponsor to it.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be. That puts more money into it. And you want to get teams and you want to get players to take it seriously, put some money on the line. And that's how it will go down.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a complicated thing, just because a lot of things in American soccer are complicated, but nobody's talking about that issue with the reserve players and how you can't just call them up as much as you want. if you're an MLS team, whether it's for Open Cup, Leagues Cup, whatever. You need to be able to do that. And if that takes going back to the table with the MLSPA to get them to sign off on it, I hope MLS can find a way to do that. And I hope the Players Association can
Mhm.
also find a way to do that, because that's a partnership that needs to be strong, and it will benefit everybody involved in soccer in the country if it happens.
And it'll just help grow the game in places that are small.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think honestly, like, this gets overblown a little bit because I'm with you. It can, but it doesn't happen that often where you see these kinds of matchups happen. And sometimes when they do, it still doesn't draw very well. Now, there have been great stories with this, and we've seen
Mhm.
some great games in this with bigger teams going to smaller teams and having these situations. But a lot of people have yelled and screamed, and there's been a lot of, honestly, in my opinion, garbage said about the Leagues Cup in
Mhm.
comparison to the Open Cup.
Mhm.
The Leagues Cup averaged 17,000 people per game during the tournament. It put more eyeballs on the teams from Mexico and the teams from the US than the Open Cup has ever in since the MLS teams joined it. And to me, that's not that, okay, Leagues Cup, yes, and no to Open Cup. To me, that says US soccer has to do a better job of marketing the US Open Cup. It's their tournament.
Mhm.
And it should be that big deal when it happens to where a big MLS team goes to play a smaller team. But here's the other flip side. What did we see all season last year with Lionel Messi when Messi did not play in games after he was injured? It happened here in Atlanta. Didn't
Mhm.
play. Everybody flips out and wants to get mad. That's pro sports.
Mhm.
How many times did you see Manchester United drawn with a smaller team in the FA Cup and they didn't play all their stars?
Mhm.
That's part of it. Messi didn't play in every, Copa del Rey game. It happens. So the idea, the romanticism of it is great, and I love the tournament because of that. But we have to be real about priorities and what matters. And yeah, it's a business. I
Mhm.
wish it wasn't. I wish there was some magical soccer tree out there that gave every team in the world all the money they needed to operate it, but that doesn't happen. Because then what's the flip side if teams don't make money? They go out of business sometimes,
Mhm.
but also in today's current yelling about everything culture when it comes to soccer, if what happened, how do we see this happening overseas? When a team doesn't go out and make splashy signings. Oh, chairman out, manager out.
Mhm.
They want you to spend all this money, but then they don't really care if it's realistic that you're balancing your books. So here, Leagues Cup brought you more money than the Open Cup ever has for these MLS teams. You can not like that all you want, but it's real. It's a fact.
Yeah.
So to me, that says US soccer has to do a better job of marketing this tournament to make it more worthwhile. Those game checks for advancing every round should be a lot higher to
Mhm.
where teams are then motivated to play their regular guys more, and there's more on the line. If they can't do that, whether teams participate in full or however that ends up getting resolved, I think MLS teams will be in the tournament, and I think there'll be some kind of a resolution on the roster side. But you're going to see a lot of teams play reserves because they're going to take Leagues Cup, which has more money and more Champions Cup spots on the line. They're going to see that taken more seriously. And I'm sorry, that's how it is, and that's, to me, to a point, on US soccer. And I hope that they can really go out now, and maybe this whole situation ends up being a good thing in that it kind of wakes everybody up to what this tournament can be,
Mhm.
and that people are saying they have a lot of love for this tournament. Now it's time to put that into motion. Go out and sell that. Go out and put sponsorship on it. Put more money into the tournament. And then everybody who is talking about the tournament, watch it and go buy tickets for it when it's in your town. I
Mhm.
hope that's what happens because of all this.
I think part of it's like the with, let's say, the even if, or there's been lots of talks like from players and coaches that there's too many games in the season or during the calendar year, all right? And so part of it's like, from my perspective is it's kind of weird that if players are saying that, hey, we're playing, there's too many games, and try to avoid I guess the burnout, is like, then why are these random tournaments like the Champions Cup was added, if to it's more, I don't know, it's more games to the
Well,
body.
Champions Cup is like your Champions League in Europe,
Oh,
so you're never going to have teams opt out of that. Leagues Cup is new,
oh, the
and
League's Cup. Sorry, and
yeah,
League's Cup. Yes.
yeah, Leagues Cup is a new thing, and Leagues Cup again, it's been successful. It was successful straight out of the gate in year one, and these teams and MLS, this is a little bit back to the structure of soccer in this country. It's not like the others, although the Premier League separated from the FA. It's not part of it. It has a partnership with the football league system, but the Premier League, and we saw this during COVID, where the teams, lower division teams in the football league, just expected the Premier League to send them money, and then kind of shamed them into doing it to a degree. And the Premier League broke away so they could sell their product more. And this happens in other countries too. There's others that have that. Scotland has that structure. There's others that have that kind of separate structure. I believe Argentina has that kind of a structure, although Argentine soccer structure is hard to keep up with to begin with because it changes every 5 minutes. Um, MLS has its own league and has its own business, and can like that or not like it, but we're not where we are with soccer in this country if MLS doesn't do what it does. That's a fact, because before MLS started, the top flight league in the United States in 1995, Atlanta played at Adams Stadium, which had concrete bleachers on one side, a field with a crown that was about 60 yards wide, and you had 6 teams in the league. So MLS coming in and growing the way that it has and doing what it's done, it's been a good thing for the game in this country. And anybody who says it's not is crazy. I'm sorry. I've been through the alternative.
Hmm.
The team that I fell in love with was the Atlanta Ruckus in that season, where they had 6 teams in the league. 4 of them made the playoffs. The owner pulled out midway through the next season because he overspent his budget. The team almost folded. Then they eventually went through that again, and they turned into the Silverbacks because new owners came in. Been there and done that. I don't want that to happen. MLS teams are at a business point now where you're not going to see that happen. You still have lower division teams that are trying to find a way to do it, because you don't have the 100 years of history that you do in other countries, where teams become essentially museums, and they're not going to fold because it's for the public good. That they don't, although we have seen some of those happen in England, for
Hmm.
example. Um, it's tough. Business is business, and Leagues Cup makes more money for Major League Soccer than the Open Cup does, flat out. And the Leagues Cup games are more compelling for the teams, the fans, and the players. And yes, I know the online fan base has been very vocal in saying that the Open Cup is very important, and I think it is. But when they say that the Leagues Cup games were not that, they didn't watch, or they're lying to you, because those games in that tournament, that was very compelling.
Hmm.
And you had some great drama in that. And yeah, look, some of it coincided because it was Messi's first games with Miami, but you had plenty of situations that didn't involve Miami in that tournament that were very compelling and very exciting. And that thing's only going to grow. It's 1 year in. You can do both. And players playing 55, 60 games, look, you don't want to have to do that every year. And teams typically don't, although your Manchester Cities and your Real Madrids and your Bayern Munichs and others do.
Yeah.
And yeah, they don't have the roster cap limitations and the size limitations that MLS teams do. And these are things that have to grow. Absolutely, they do. But playing the 55 or 60 games, managers have to balance player
Hmm.
workload. That is something that has to happen. But this has also been going on for years. I think it was Lothar Matthäus who said this week that, I played 55 or 60 games a year every year, and I didn't cry about it. We understand sports science better now, which is a good thing. And we understand workload better for players and injury risk for players better than anything. And that's a good thing. But this is not all that new. And for the talk about it when it comes to MLS, UEFA teams are about to go through more Champions League games starting next year. Um, Not even getting into the Super League side of things. It's the game is a business, whether we like it or not. It is an artistic business, but it is a business. And I want US soccer to get the business of the Open Cup in a better spot, not just for the MLS teams, but for the lower division teams too. I want everybody to make more money in this, so everybody's more sustainable.
Hmm. And I think a big thing was just a matter the like the I guess the when it comes to the Open Cup was just the bluntness of MLS saying that hey, we're not going to send our
Right. I didn't
first
like the way it
team.
was handled. No,
Yeah.
I didn't like the way it was handled. And like I said, I don't know the whole story behind the scenes. I'm sure there is more of a story than what's out there. I would like to know where the possible alternatives were
Hmm.
and how things could get handled. But also, sometimes this is what it comes down to. And how many times have we seen this? You've got to be blunt to get the changes that you want.
Hmm.
And I think MLS, obviously, because every team would, USL would say the same thing too. You want more money in this tournament. US soccer needs to go out and bring more money to the tournament.
Hmm.
But also, I think this is on the other side because I really do think the roster rule situation is a big issue for MLS with this. And if you've got to put a little bit of pressure on to try to get the roster rules opened up more to where it's not just about players who are part of the MLSPA outside of those 4 times you can get called up. You
Hmm.
know, maybe MLS Next Pro players need to be part of the MLSPA. Maybe that needs to happen. Maybe that's the way to work around this. I don't know. But it needs to get resolved, and it should have been resolved before any announcements were made. I don't like that this has played out the way that it has because, like I said, it's given people the opportunity to honestly bring a lot of things forward that aren't fully the truth and try to
Hmm.
make names for themselves, standing on soapboxes. That gets frustrating
Yeah.
after a while. These things need to get resolved better. Hopefully, this will be something that ultimately is a good thing in the way that it gets resolved, but it needs to get resolved better, and it should have been resolved before now.
The last topic I want to talk about is Atlanta United's off season and their MLS Super Draft real quick. So just looking through, Atlanta United had drafted 3 players in the Super Draft. 2 of them were goalkeepers, Jaden Hibbert and Casper Moles, with defender Javier Armas. So big off-season question mark was the has been for Atlanta United has been their goalkeeper situation. Guzan's, he's towards the tail end of his career. Atlanta United has re-signed Quentin Westberg. They have signed Josh Cohen, and then drafted 2 keepers in the MLS draft. What's your take on that? That's 5 potential, rostered goalies.
Well, you might not have 2 of them. The 2 guys that you drafted are underclassmen,
Mm,
and the rules in the super draft changed this year, and I think in
mm,
a really good way. Teams can draft underclassmen and then go back to school,
mm,
and you can hold on to their rights. So these are 2 sophomores. Casper Moles has been a regular at University of Kentucky for 2 years now. Jaden Hibbert was a regular last year in a sophomore year. He played, I think, 6 or 7 games his freshman year. Very different kinds of goalkeepers. Hibbert's domestic, although he might be able to represent Jamaica or Canada if he so chooses. Moles is from Denmark. I don't think both of them go pro. Hibbert, I had a chance to talk to him on Atlanta Soccer tonight, and he sounded very open to joining Atlanta United now if the deal can get done, and he would go to the second team and play games there. So what Carlos Bocanegra explained, and I think it's a smart one, when you're thinking about big picture here and you're thinking about structure, you gotta have a pipeline. And when you have your 3 first team goalkeepers all over the age of 30, Cohen's the youngest at 31, and you don't have that next guy coming to your second team yet. Vicente Reyes took a deal with Norwich City to join their kind of second team slash like U23 team. Um, and Justin Garces had injury issues and didn't develop the way that they hoped. So they ended up not picking up the option on him. So you didn't have that young guy ready to go. Now you've drafted 2 that maybe they both come in, maybe neither one comes in right now, but they're in your pipeline. You can watch them develop in various ways. They signed John Berner to the second team today, another veteran who was a assistant coach and goalkeeper for Huntsville City last year. So Berner gives you experience with that second team. That's good to have. You have a regular guy that you can count on. You need that. So I like where they are in terms of pipeline. I really want to see Josh Cohen and what he brings. He's got a few games of Champions League experience, which is awesome. The Israeli professional league top flight is not at the level of MLS, in my opinion. So in general, I want to see how he translates to MLS. And being in a situation where you have Brad Guzan under contract for another year, it's a good thing where that Cohen doesn't have to be the man right now. He might be the man by midseason. He might not be the man until next season. But I think the idea is that he will be the man. And now you've got good competition at the goalkeeper spot. Quentin Westberg is the perfect reserve goalkeeper to have. Great training player, great player in the locker room. He can go and work with the younger goalkeepers as well. I'm really happy they brought Quentin Westberg back, one of the really good guys in this team.
Mm.
But now you have a guy who can really push Gazan. And I think Brad is, he's got one more year under contract. I don't know how much longer he has in his pro career. I think he took some unfair criticism in 2023. You know it better than anybody when you talk about goalkeepers. You know, save percentage is not a great number to look at, in my opinion, because it takes nothing into consideration about where those shots are coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're giving up big chances, and Atlanta United didn't give up a whole lot of shots last year on goal to begin with. They were one of the better teams in the league on that, but they gave up some really bad shots on goal in bad spots where your goalkeeper is stranded. He's dead.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he didn't save a whole lot of shots that he faced that were on goal last year because he didn't see a whole lot. And the ones that he did give up, a lot of those were really bad shots to be giving up in the first place. It's not on Brad Guzan to get beat there. It's not on him. It's not his fault.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was an unfair thing that got thrown around after the season. I didn't really care for that, but he is what he is at this point in age. I think the one thing you have to remember, though, and it's a really important factor, is his leadership and what he brings to that side of things, because that was very important last year in a variety of different ways. I mean, one, just keeping a happy locker room together is not an easy thing to do when you're the captain of a team. And when you have the comings and goings that Atlanta United did last year, and I think ultimately they got it right and came out in a much better place than they were when they started and where they were in the middle. The reason those players could come in mid-season like Saba Lobjanidze, like Shande Silva, like Tristan Muyamba, Edwin Mosquera coming back into the team, the reason they could come in and hit the ground running was because you had a great leadership structure and a great culture, and your captain's a big part of that. And Brad Guzan was a huge part of that. So it's not as simple as his save percentage wasn't good, so it's time to move on. He's going to have to win the job. And that's a good thing. That makes players better. And if Cohen beats him out, then Cohen beats him out. But I'd love to see Brad Guzan finish on a high. I really would.
Real quick, I have a couple minutes left with this. Real quick responses. What do you think? Miles Robinson and Thiago Almada, do you think they will stay or go after this season or even before?
Oh, I think Robinson is checking out options elsewhere, and it's just going to depend on the offers. I think Atlanta's probably going to have to sign another starting center back before Robinson makes his decision. So I don't expect him to be back. There's been a max offer in front of him all season long, and he wanted to go test the waters, which more players should do, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not expecting him back, although you never know. Thiago Almada, man, it's the total unknown. There's just no way to know because we don't know what's going to happen in that January window in Europe. If a club comes in with the right number for him, it'll be the right time for him to go.
Mm-hmm.
If that right club or that right number doesn't come in, he might end up playing it out better to stay, go to the Olympics in the summer where he's got to qualify first with Argentina, but he would captain that team. He's captained their U23s in friendlies. If he goes to the Olympics and has a great Olympic tournament as the captain of Argentina, I think the offers and the potential landing spot for him could be even better if he waits till the summer. Hard to do that, though, when it is that time. He's good enough to go to Europe now. It just depends on the right deal coming together.
All right, cool. Well, Jason, thank you very much for having the time today to join on the Soccerpedia podcast, and hopefully you have a good holiday and Happy New Year to you.
Have a great holiday. Hopefully everybody out there listening has a great holiday as well, and we'll be talking more soccer in 2024.
Sweet. All right, have a good one. That was it for today's episode of the Soccerpedia podcast. Thank you everyone for listening in, and I hope you all have a wonderful holiday break and Happy New Year. We'll be back with another episode in the near future. So in the meantime, stay tuned and feel free to listen to our other episodes on Spotify and wherever you get your podcast.